to Toxic Till the End. In this episode, we unravel a story that begins with innocent teasing, late night conversations, and the thrill of young love. It's the kind of connection that feels effortless at first, the kind that makes you believe in fate. But as emotions deepen and loyalties are tested, the lines between love, control, and manipulation begin to blur. This isn't just a story about first love. It's a story about the unseen strings people pull to keep us tied to them. About the unspoken games we don't realize we are playing until it's too late. It's also about the moment you realize that sometimes the people who say they're looking out for you are really just making sure you never leave. So grab a drink, get comfy, and let me take you through the story. You know how some people just kind of drift in your life, and before you realize it, they become a part of your story? Not in some big dramatic way, but in this slow, quiet way that sneaks up on you. That's what happened to me when Colin came into my life. I was 13 when I first met Colin. He was my brother's friend, so he was always around at our house. And at first, Colin was just this familiar face, someone who crashed at our place so often it felt like he practically lived there. He was older, confident, and had this way of carrying himself that made it clear he wasn't a boy anymore. And to me, at 13, he was just Colin, just a guy who hung around, teased me in passing, and never really looked twice. At least, not at first. It started off simple. I'd be in the kitchen grabbing a snack, and he'd walk by with some offhand joke about me. Or I'd be sitting in the living room, minding my own business, and he'd show up out of nowhere, giving me a hard time, poking fun at me whenever he could think of something dumb to say. And it wasn't mean, it was just playful. And he knew how to get under my skin in a way that made me roll my eyes, but also made me feel seen. And then somewhere along the way, those moments started to shift, because the teasing turned into longer conversations. Not anything deep at first, just talking. And we would talk about school, music, stupid things like what kind of cereal was actually the best. You know, the kind of conversations that don't mean much, but somehow mean everything at the same time. And for a girl who was still figuring out her place in the world, having someone like him listen, like really listen, felt something special. Even if he didn't always understood the things I was trying to say, just having someone there made all the difference. There was one thing about him that I could never ignore. He was always dating someone. In 2004, he was with a girl named Paige. She was from LA. And I remember her so well because she had a brother, and her brother was around my age, and his name was Jason. Well, suddenly, out of nowhere, there was this idea, this little scheme that maybe Jason and I would be a thing. I mean, I was just 13. What did I even know about being set up? But Paige and Colin thought it would be cute if they set me up with Jason, which was giving my email to Jason. And just like that, a new conversation began. I remember the first time Jason and I started talking. It was different. He was my age, like I said, So there wasn't this feeling of being watched over like sometimes I felt with Colin. Jason wasn't someone who teased me like he was trying to prove something. He was just nice. We talked online, back when emails and instant messagings were the height of romantic communication, which was before social media, before dating apps, before everything became so instant. There was something kind of exciting about waiting for a reply. We decided to meet in person at youth camp. Now, if you've ever been to youth camp, it's a world of its own. There's this weird mix of excitement and awkwardness where everyone's trying to act like they're totally cool, but really, we were just kids trying to figure each other out. Meeting Jason there felt like stepping into something I wasn't sure I was ready for. Was this supposed to be some kind of summer romance? Was I supposed to like him? Looking back, that moment, that summer, it was just the beginning of something bigger, something I wouldn't fully understand until much, much later. Because as much as I tried to focus, as much as I let myself be set up with Jason and go along with the idea of something new, I was already caught in something else, something unspoken, something that, whether I liked it or not, was going to follow me for months. There are some summers that stick with you forever, not because of the heat or the places you went to, but because of the people, because of feelings you didn't understand at the time. But looking back, you realize that summer changed something. For me, the summer I turned 14. If you've ever been to a big youth camp, you know it's like stepping into a world of its own. Thousands of teenagers from all over, all packed into one campus. Some are there for faith, some for fun, and some, well, some were just looking for someone. For me, I thought I was just going for the experience. But little did I know, I had no idea how complicated things were going to get. We checked in at the administration stand, and from there, the boys and girls parted ways to settle into our assigned dorms. The first few days were kind of a blur. It was full of morning worship, seminars, activities, and night services. And every day it was structured, packed with things to keep us busy, but my mind was constantly wondering. I did not see Jason, and I'd be lying if I said I wasn't hoping to run into him. Back then, running into someone wasn't as easy as just sending a text, because cell phones were not common yet, and if you wanted to connect, you had to rely on email, AIM, or MSN Messenger. Or like me, you just trusted fate to put you in the right place at the right time. It wasn't until midweek that it finally happened. My friends and I were headed to the gym for the basketball tournaments, and heading there, I saw Colin, but I did not see Jason. So Colin was standing near the gym doors with his girlfriend Paige, casually leaning against the wall like he belonged there. When Colin noticed me, he smiled in a way he always did, like he knew something I didn't. When I walked up to Colin, he introduced me to Paige, and then finally, he turned to Jason, and there he was, Jason. We exchanged quick hellos, nothing too deep. There was this awkwardness, like we were supposed to be excited to meet, but in reality, we were just two kids who had been set up by other people. It wasn't until later that day when I stepped out of the gym towards the restrooms. And that's when Jason made his move. He approached me asking if I wanted to talk, and I agreed. So we walked up to the track on the second floor, and for the first time, we had a real conversation, one without expectations of others hanging over us. I noticed my friends spying on us from below. They were giggling and whispering, but soon it was time for dinner, and I took that as my cue to leave. So we made plans to meet after the night service, but even then, something felt off to me about Jason. So that night, the girls and I attended service at the chapel. It was full of worship and a sermon, like the usual, but my mind kept drifting. So after service, when everyone spilled out to fellowship, Jason was waiting for me by the fountain outside of the chapel. We walked around the campus together side by side, and it was peaceful, but deep down, I felt nothing. There was no spark, no butterflies, no feelings like I had to see him again. When we reached my dorm, I told him good night and I went straight to bed. The next day, I made a decision I was going to focus on the real reason I was at camp. I didn't want any distractions, no forced connections, just me, my faith, and my friends. I didn't see Colin all week, and I assumed he was spending time with Paige, his girlfriend. I did not see Jason much either, which I thought was for the best. But then came the last night of camp. Jason was waiting for me by the fountain before service. And that night was concert night, which was kind of a fun day for everybody. So he invited me to sit with him on the balcony of the chapel, and then I followed him. We sat in the front row, silent as the singers performed, and then he leaned over to me, close enough only for me to hear him. He asked me, "Will you be my girlfriend?" And I remember freezing because I was shocked. I didn't know what to say, and I had no idea how to say no without hurting his feelings. So the only thing I could think of was to say yes. And I know it's terrible. The rest of the night, I barely spoke. And Jason noticed and he asked if there was something wrong with me, but all I could do was blame it on being tired. So I told him I was going back to the dorm and he walked me there. After we said goodnight, I knew I had made a mistake. The next morning, everything moved fast. So it went from breakfast to morning worship and packing our belongings. After all that, we went to our dorms, packed our bags, and then we were in the common area while everyone was saying their goodbyes. Of course, I was trying to avoid Jason, but he found me first. And before he left, he asked me for a hug, so I gave him one, feeling guilty, but knowing I had to break it off, just not there in that moment. And then as soon as Jason walked away, Colin appeared. Like he had been waiting and he was pissed. He walked up to me and he was like, "Why didn't you tell me?" And I just looked at him confused, like, "Tell you what?" He was like, "That you said yes to Jason, that you are his girlfriend." And all I could do was just stare at him, not understanding why he even cared. And all I could say to him was, "I didn't see you all week, so how was I supposed to tell you?" But that wasn't enough for him. He was so angry, so hurt. He didn't want to talk to me again. And then he walked away. And I was left standing there wondering why. Like, why did it matter to him? Why did he care so much? Because he was with Paige and he had Paige. So why did it feel like that moment meant something more to him? On the way home, Colin did not speak. Not to me, not to anyone. And so my friends started to ask if I knew what was wrong with him, but I was like, no, I do not know. And of course I lied because I didn't want people to make a big deal out of it. And then at a rest stop, I finally worked up the nerve to ask if he was okay. And all he said was, I'm fine. But his eyes said something else. A week passed. I did not hear from Colin because, of course, he was mad at me. And I didn't reach out either. Something about his reaction at camp, like the anger, the way he shut me out, left me feeling uneasy. And to be honest, I had my own mess to deal with because Jason and I, we were not meant to be. I had been carrying the weight of that yes since the moment I said it. But as it turned out, I wouldn't have to figure out how to break up with him because Jason beat me to it. And yeah, he broke up with me. He told me that things were moving too fast and he needed to slow down. All I could think of was, thank God. It was a clean break, no hard feelings, no tears, just relief. But then, almost as if he had been waiting, Colin came back around. Colin started talking to me again, acting like nothing had happened. At first, I let it go, but then during one of our conversations, he dropped something that made me stop in my tracks. And he said, I told Jason to break up with you. I stared at him, trying to process what he said. So I was like, what? He's like, yeah, I told him to break up with you. I didn't know whether to be angry or confused. All I could ask was, why did you do that? And he didn't answer right away. He just gave me that same look, the one I was starting to recognize. The one that said there was more going on underneath the surface, but he wasn't going to say it out loud. And he finally said, I was just looking out for you. I was like, looking out for me? It didn't make sense because, like I said, he was with Paige, he had Paige. So why did it feel like the one he was trying to keep close was me? I started to wonder, was Colin protecting me or was he trying to keep me? A month after youth camp, our youth group set out on a mission trip to Mississippi, and the goal was to revitalize a ranch in need of care. We painted fences, cleaned out barns, and helped with maintenance. But what I remember most from that trip isn't just the work we did, it's the way certain moments that, looking back, said more than words ever could. Throughout the trip, Colin was always nearby, whether I was with my girlfriends or on my own. Somehow he was never too far. And maybe it was a coincidence. But one moment that lingers in my mind started as lighthearted teasing, or so I thought. Two guys from our youth group turned a joke into something sharper, something meant to cut. At first, I laughed it off, but as soon as word twisted into insults, I felt that all too familiar sting. The one that tells you you're being picked apart, that you're the punchline of the joke you never asked to be in. And I refused to let them break me, but their words stayed with me. Like a shadow, they followed me, pressing my chest until I couldn't hold it in anymore. So I did what I always did when I didn't want to make a scene. I disappeared. I slipped away to the bathroom, locked the door, and let the tears fall. Because I wanted to be alone, but my friends knew me better than that. One of them found me, then another, then the rest. When they asked me what was wrong, I told them, and instead of brushing it off, they listened. They held space for my feelings, reminded me I wasn't alone. So that night, while everyone was enjoying game night, I stayed behind in the girls' bedroom, wanting to pretend I was fine when I wasn't. But before the night ended, one of my girlfriends knocked on the door. She said, "Colin wants to talk to you." I wasn't sure what to expect, but I went anyways, and I met Colin outside. When I told him what happened, he didn't get angry. He didn't promise to confront them or make a big scene. Instead, he reassured me. He told me not to take it personally, and it was just a joke. I wished he had been there to understand why it didn't feel like just a joke. But I knew I couldn't let it weigh me down any longer. And then, like Colin could do, he made me laugh. He cracked jokes, exaggerated stories, anything to pull me out of my head and back into the moment. And somehow it worked. For the first time that night, I felt lighter. The next day, the ranch owner treated us all to seafood. Colin and I sat together, and whether it was intentional or not, I noticed how he positioned himself, like a silent shield, just in case those same guys tried to approach me. His concern for me was unspoken, but it was there, lingering in the space between us. When someone goes out of their way to make sure you're okay, to lift your spirits, to protect you in their own quiet way, it means something. The real question is, what does it mean when they don't even realize they're doing it? Looking back, I can't help but wonder, was Colin just being a friend, or was there something more beneath the surface? Something neither of us were ready to face? Because the truth is, sometimes the moments that mean the most don't announce themselves. They don't come with grand gestures or dramatic confessions. They just slip in quietly in the form of a shared meal, a well-timed joke, or an unspoken sense of protection. And sometimes you don't realize their weight until much, much later. I knew Colin was keeping me tied to him, and maybe I let him. Not because I was trapped, but because deep down I wasn't ready to let go. Sometimes we don't realize we've crossed them until there's no going back. Maybe it was always meant to happen this way, or maybe some people come into your life to teach you what love really looks like, even if it doesn't last forever. But here's what I've learned. Love, in any form, is never a waste. Even if it ends, even if it hurts, even if it changes everything, it is still worth experiencing. Because love teaches, love transforms, and love, no matter how fleeting, love leaves something behind that stays with you forever. Okay guys, that is it for today's episode. Don't forget to follow Toxic till the end, because trust me, this story, it is far from over. There's so much more I am going to share about this journey. And I hope you guys stay tuned for part 2 of this episode. But until then, hold close the moments that matter and never be afraid to feel anything. Thank you for listening and see you in the next episode. Bye bye.